The boardroom was silent except for the ticking of a minimalist wall clock, each second a tiny explosion in Elizabeth Carter's ears. She sat at the head of the long glass table, her posture perfect, her jaw tight, and her hands folded neatly over a leather notebook she wasn't using. Across from her, the investors finished their polished takedown. "You're losing the edge, Elizabeth. Innovation isn't emotion. You can't lead a billion-dollar company on sentiment." Another chimed in. "You've been distracted. Maybe you need to step back. Get some perspective." She smiled the way she always did in rooms like this, perfectly measured, professional, unreadable. But something inside her cracked, quietly and definitively. The meeting ended. Suits stood, shook hands, avoided eye contact. Elizabeth walked out without a word, past her assistant calling her name, past the elevator, past the sleek floors and frosted glass corridors of Carter Tech's downtown tower, out into the chaos of the city. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't breathe in that building anymore. The streets were wet from a morning rain, and she didn't have an umbrella. The wind pulled at her hair, ruined her makeup. She didn't care. Her heels clicked across cracked sidewalks, aimless and quick, like a metronome marking a breakdown. People didn't recognize her out here, not without the context, not without the boardroom, the press releases, the power. Out here, she was just another face in a crowd of too many. And something about that was a relief. She reached the entrance to a subway station and paused. It wasn't the kind of place she usually went, but that was the point. She descended slowly, heart pounding for reasons she didn't fully understand. Her phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from her COO, 1 text from her mother, and 2 from numbers she didn't save. Her battery blinked red. She turned it off. The station was cold, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. She sat on a bench and watched trains come and go. People push past each other like they were late for something more important than their own lives. She stayed. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. Her body ached from holding in years of everything. Pressure, decisions, expectations. Then, without really thinking, she stood and boarded a train that arrived without destination in mind. The doors closed behind her with a soft whoosh. Elizabeth Carter, CEO, vanished from the grid. She didn't know what she was looking for. She only knew she hadn't felt real in years. And today, that had to change. The train moved like a slow heartbeat through the tunnels, rocking gently as Elizabeth leaned her head against the window. The city blurred past in dark, fractured shapes, distorted by flickering lights and water streaks on the glass. She had no idea where the train was going. And for the first time in years, she didn't check. She got off after 10 stops, at a terminal she'd never heard of. The air was different here, raw, unpolished. Concrete platforms stretched wide, stained by time and use. People moved with a different rhythm, slower, heavier, as if life here didn't reward haste. She checked her phone out of habit. Dead. No wallet. No charger. No security detail or car waiting outside. Just her, a trench coat too clean for the place, and a lingering sense of disorientation she hadn't shaken since the boardroom. She looked up at the bus schedule. None of it made sense. The names were unfamiliar, and the machines only took cash. She had none. That's when she heard the scratch of graphite on paper. A soft, steady sound, like rain drawing lines in silence. She turned. A man sat on a plastic bench near the exit, worn jeans, a hoodie smeared with paint, and a sketch pad balanced on one knee. His fingers were stained with charcoal. He didn't look at her. His eyes were on a sleeping child curled beside a vending machine, and on the paper, he brought the child to life. Something about him felt calm, untouched, like he lived in a separate pocket of the world where things still had meaning. Elizabeth looked away, embarrassed to have stared. She turned back to the ticket machine and sighed. A useless gesture. She was stuck. "Short a ticket?" a voice asked gently. She turned again. The artist had approached, holding a small folded bill between his fingers. She blinked. No, I'm fine. I don't need... It's just a bus fare." He smiled, shrugging. "Not alone. Not a big deal. Happens all the time down here." His eyes were clear, kind but distant, like someone who had nothing to prove. She hesitated, then accepted it slowly. "Thank you." He nodded and stepped back, already retreating into the anonymity of the platform. "I'm Ellie," she said, almost on instinct. He paused just for a second. "Liam." No handshake, no pretense, just names exchanged like passing thoughts. She boarded the next bus, sat by the window, and watched as Liam faded from view. Just a stranger. A gentle interruption. But something had shifted. The bus pulled away. And in the corner of her mind, Elizabeth Carter, now Ellie, realized she was smiling, not for the gesture, but for the feeling it gave her. Someone had seen her, not as a title, not as a name on a Forbes list, just her. And that small kindness was enough to make the world feel a little less hollow. The ride felt longer than it should have. Ellie leaned her head against the window, her reflection looking back with unfamiliar softness. Her hair was slightly damp, her makeup faded, and yet she looked lighter. Her fingers traced the folded bill still in her hand, now tucked into her coat pocket like a souvenir. She smiled without meaning to. It wasn't about the money. She had more wealth than most people could dream of. But that wasn't what Liam had given her. He had looked at her, really looked, and hadn't seen a CEO, or a power figure, or even someone who needed fixing. He saw a woman, lost in a terminal, unsure of herself. And he met that moment with gentle kindness and no expectations. That was what stayed with her. The bus hissed to a stop in a part of the city she didn't know. She got off, walked slowly, letting the unfamiliar streets wrap around her. Neon signs buzzed overhead. The hum of life here was quieter, deeper. People moved differently. A couple laughed under a flickering streetlight. A teenager danced with headphones in, lost in rhythm. A man sold grilled corn on the corner, waving smoke out of his eyes. It was real, unfiltered, and she liked it. She found a small cafe that didn't ask questions and bought a tea with change from the counter's tip jar. She sat by the window, sipping slowly, trying to remember the last time she had done something like this. Aimless, spontaneous, unstrategic. The answer didn't come. Instead, her mind drifted back to Liam, the way he held his pencil, the way he noticed things others missed, like the child sleeping under the vending machine, like her lost expression. He hadn't asked for anything, not even her story. That, more than anything, made her want to know his. She didn't even realize how late it had gotten. The city outside was now cloaked in night, and her tea had gone cold. She leaned back in the booth, exhaled deeply, and for the first time in years, didn't feel like running back to her life. Maybe tomorrow, she thought. But not yet. The next morning, Ellie sat in her luxury apartment staring at her phone. Her inbox had 137 unread emails, 4 missed calls from the CTO, 1 from her mother. The news feed buzzed with headlines about tech stocks, mergers, IPOs. But her mind wasn't there. It was back in that bus terminal, back to the sound of pencil on paper, back to the calm in Liam's voice. She should have felt ridiculous. She didn't know this man. They'd exchanged barely a dozen words. And yet, something about him had imprinted itself on her. Quiet, simple, undeniable. By noon, she had made a decision she couldn't quite explain. She changed into jeans and sneakers, a plain sweater, tied her hair back loosely. No makeup, no jewelry. She looked like someone else. And maybe that was the point. She took the train back. Everything looked different in daylight. The terminal was louder now, filled with the noise of morning commuters and children with backpacks. The buzz of vendors opening stalls, the smell of cheap coffee and rain on pavement. She walked slowly, unsure if he'd be there. And then she saw him. Same bench, same sketch pad. Liam sat hunched over, focused on a new drawing, a boy and his mother sharing a sandwich on the curb. He was capturing the light between them, the closeness, the way the child leaned in mid-laugh. He didn't notice her at first. She approached cautiously. "Hey!" He looked up, squinted slightly, as if trying to place her. "You gave me a bus fare yesterday," she added, offering a half smile. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Right. Ellie." She nodded. He gestured to the bench beside him. "You find where you were going?" She sat. "Not really, but it turns out I didn't need to." He chuckled, flipping a page in his sketch pad. Sometimes that's the best kind of trip. For a while, they just sat, watching the life of the terminal move around them like a current. He sketched. She watched. "Do you do this every day?" she asked. "Pretty much," he said. "It's not glamorous, but people forget how much beauty lives in the in-between moments. I like to catch those before they disappear." She studied him, his ease, his stillness, how present he was in a world that never stopped moving. "How long have you been drawing people here?" "Since I stopped pretending I was meant to be someone else." That line hit her like a soft punch. She didn't say anything, just looked ahead and breathed. And Liam, just a stranger yesterday, kept drawing. The next few days passed like chapters in a quiet novel. Ellie kept coming back, sometimes in the mornings with a coffee in hand, sometimes in the late afternoon when the light slanted golden across the concrete. She always found Liam there, in the same spot, with his sketch pad and his watchful eyes. They spoke more now. Bits and pieces. Not interviews, not interrogations. Just moments shared like brush strokes on a canvas. She learned he lived in a small loft above an old bookstore nearby. Rent cheap, the walls cracked, but filled with light. That he used to study architecture before deciding buildings bored him and people didn't. She told him she worked in consulting, vague enough to be uninteresting, specific enough to pass. He didn't pry. He didn't even ask her last name. And she loved him for that. They talked about little things, books, street food, colors in the sky no one noticed. He described people like art pieces, full of angles and shadows and soul. She told him he saw things most people didn't bother to look for. One afternoon, as they shared a sandwich from a vendor, Liam asked, "What made you come back here? That first time, you looked like you'd just stepped out of another world." "I had," she admitted. She looked at the ground, hesitating. Then she said, "Everything in my life is controlled. Every decision, every word, every outfit. Even my smiles are scheduled." Liam didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her in that quiet way he did, not trying to solve her, just listening. Out here, she continued, voice low. No one expects anything from me. I can breathe. He nodded. There's a strange kind of freedom in being invisible. She smiled. Exactly. He tore off a piece of bread and tossed it to a nearby pigeon. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to matter. Like, really matter. Not to the world, but to one person. Just one. Who sees everything about you and says, yeah, I still want that. Hey? Ellie looked at him, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. You don't think you matter to anyone? I don't know. People stop, admire the drawings, but no one stays. They pass through. I'm background. She wanted to tell him he mattered, that he was the only person who had made her feel seen in months, but the words felt too fragile, too soon. Instead, she said, maybe they don't deserve to see you properly. He glanced at her, a smile playing at his lips. Maybe you do. The air between them shifted. Not romantic yet, but deeply intimate. Like something important was being built. One word, one sketch, one silence at a time. When she left that evening, the city felt warmer, the air lighter, and in her pocket, folded neatly, was a tiny sketch Liam had slipped to her without a word. It was her. Not posed, not perfect. Just her sitting on the bench, head tilted, eyes distant. For the first time in a long time, she recognized herself. Ellie lost track of how many days passed. Her calendar filled with meetings she didn't attend. Emails went unanswered. Assistants panicked, and her board grew restless. But she felt calm, detached from the spinning wheel she had once been chained to. Every morning she woke up early, made coffee in silence, and dressed in jeans and quiet clothes. Then she went to the terminal, her new sanctuary. And Liam was always there. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they barely spoke, just sat side by side, watching the city move around them. On rainy days, he'd bring an umbrella big enough for two. On colder mornings, she brought an extra scarf. It became a rhythm, a quiet routine that felt more real than anything she'd built in glass towers. He started telling her about his dreams. I used to want to open a gallery, he said one afternoon, his eyes focused on a blank page. One with no rules, just stories told through paint and ink. Real people, honest moments. What stopped you? She asked. He smiled without humor. Life, fear, the usual suspects. You spend long enough hearing you won't make it, and eventually you start agreeing. She looked at him, saw the rawness behind the words. It made her chest ache. You should still do it, she said softly. Maybe. He paused. But dreaming is expensive, and I'm not sure anyone wants what I have to say. I do, she said, before she could stop herself. He glanced at her, not with shock, but with something deeper. Like maybe he'd hoped someone would say that someday, and now that someone had. She looked away quickly, suddenly shy. You ever think about just disappearing? He asked after a moment. Leaving everything behind? Ellie hesitated. Every single day. He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. That was the thing about Liam. He never pushed. He let people arrive at their own truths. She realized then how much she craved that. Someone who didn't expect her to perform, to prove, to fix everything. Someone who just existed beside her. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows on the platform, Ellie knew they were running on borrowed time. This space, this version of her, couldn't last forever. But she didn't care, because for the first time she wasn't counting minutes. She was living them. Ellie didn't mean to be seen. She had gotten comfortable, too comfortable, in this hidden version of her life. One where she wasn't CEO Elizabeth Carter, but just Ellie, quiet, present, unremarkable in the best way. But masks, no matter how well crafted, always slip. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. She and Liam were sitting outside a small art supply store, sipping paper cups of hot cider. He was sketching a little girl chasing soap bubbles while Ellie watched with amusement. Her laughter, soft, real, echoed down the sidewalk. That's when she heard it. Elizabeth? The name hit like cold water. She turned instinctively. A woman in a sharp gray pantsuit stood a few feet away, holding a phone mid-air, her eyes wide. "I knew it was you. Oh my God, it's really you." The recognition cut through her like glass. The woman approached, gushing. "My niece interned at Carter Tech last summer. You're literally her idol. What are you doing here?" Liam looked up slowly, confused. Ellie's lips parted, but no words came. She was caught, not by scandal, but by exposure. She began, but her voice faltered. The woman didn't seem to notice the tension. "Could I get a quick picture?" "I'll tag you, of course. You look amazing." Liam watched silently as Ellie forced a smile. A hollow, practiced smile. One he had never seen on her before. The woman took the photo, thanked her again, and left, still mid-sentence, already posting. Ellie sat in silence. Liam didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, he asked, "Elizabeth?" She didn't meet his eyes. "It's a name I use for work." "That was more than work," he said gently. "You're not just some consultant, are you?" She looked down at her cider, heart racing. The quiet, slow world they had built together suddenly felt so fragile. "I didn't lie. I just didn't want this to be about that." He was quiet for a long beat. "So, who are you really?" She wanted to explain, to unravel the pressure, the empire, the image. But all she said was, "I don't know anymore." Liam nodded slowly. "I liked Ellie," he said, standing. "I hope she's still in there." And with that, he walked away, not angry, not dramatic, just disappointed. And for the first time since meeting him, Ellie felt truly alone again. Liam didn't show up the next day, or the one after. Ellie returned to the terminal anyway, waiting on the cold bench they used to share, hoping he might walk up with his sketch pad and that quiet smile. But he never came. The sketch he gave her, the one of her sitting in stillness, remained folded in her pocket, worn at the creases. On the third day, she went looking for him. The bookstore above which he lived was dimly lit, the bell on the door announcing her with a jingle that felt too loud. An older woman behind the counter looked up, startled. "Excuse me," Ellie said. "Is Liam here?" The woman studied her for a long moment before responding. "He left this morning. Said he needed air." "Do you know where?" But the woman just shook her head. Ellie wandered the neighborhood for hours. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drumbeat of regret. When she finally saw him, sitting on a short wall near the park, sketchpad closed, staring at the sky, her breath caught. She approached carefully. "Liam." He didn't look at her. "So, what's your net worth?" Her stomach dropped. "That's not. Google says 400 million, he said flatly. "But I guess it depends on the market, right?" "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Just let me explain." He turned, eyes filled with something deeper than anger. Hurt. "You lied." "I didn't lie," she said quickly. "I just didn't tell you everything." He stood. "You let me think we were the same. You let me hand you a $5 bill like you needed it. You let me talk about being invisible like you'd understand." "I do understand," she said desperately. That's the whole reason I came here in the first place. I was drowning in my life. And when I met you, I felt like I could breathe again." He looked away. "Everything I told you, everything I felt, it was real. Just not the name." "And what about now?" he asked, voice low. "What part of you is talking to me, Ellie or Elizabeth?" She stepped closer. "Both." He studied her, then shook his head, gently but firmly. "I don't know what's real with you anymore. Liam, please." He stepped back. "You had the whole world and chose to wear someone else's skin. I only had one shot to be seen, and I gave it to a ghost." She didn't chase him as he walked away. She stood frozen, feeling the weight of every decision crash down at once. That night, she returned to her penthouse. The city glittered below, cold and indifferent. She was surrounded by everything she had built, and had never felt so hollow. The boardroom was silent as Elizabeth Carter slid a single-page letter across the polished table. "I'm stepping down," she said, voice steady. Mouths fell open. A few exchanged glances. One man dropped his pen. "You built this company," her CFO said, stunned. "I built a machine," she replied, "and I don't want to be its engine anymore." No one argued. They all saw it in her eyes. She was already gone. In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth did something no one expected. She sold her shares. Not all, but enough to walk away clean. Enough to start again. And with the money, she did something even fewer people understood. She went back to the neighborhoods the city tried to forget. The ones Liam had shown her, if not in words, then through his gaze. Places where people lived full lives in the cracks between skyscrapers. She bought an abandoned rec center, renovated it, filled it with canvases and easels, with paints and charcoal, with laughter and open doors. She called it the Studio Project. There were no membership fees, no background checks, just a sign at the door that read, "Come as you are. Leave with something more." Kids came first, then teenagers, then adults who had forgotten they were allowed to dream. She brought in artists to teach, writers, musicians, architects who remembered how to build with more than concrete. She sat with them, helped sweep floors, shared meals. She smiled more, not for press, not for reputation, but for herself. And yet, every time she looked at a blank canvas, she saw Liam's hands. The way he held a pencil like it held truth. She never tried to find him again. She had broken something delicate. She knew that now, but she missed him in quiet moments, in sunlight across the floor, in the way a child laughed while drawing something only they understood. She missed him the most, in silence. Elizabeth Carter no longer existed the way she used to. Power didn't define her. Her last name didn't open doors here. And still, she was more herself than ever before. But letting go, she learned, didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying someone with you, in the color of your work, in the kindness you give, in the hope that maybe, one day, they'll see who you've become and forgive you. The walls of the public school were covered in handprints and hope. It was the final day of the Studio Project's latest outreach, a 3-week immersion into art, storytelling, and music for kids who'd never owned a paintbrush. Elizabeth walked the hallway slowly, admiring every chaotic, beautiful mural, her fingers trailing the textured layers of color. She still didn't do press, didn't speak on panels. She showed up in jeans, tied her hair back, and poured paint into trays like any other volunteer. She belonged here, not above it, in it. A group of students ran past her, giggling, their hands covered in purple and gold. "He's in the library!" one of them shouted over their shoulder. She smiled. Kids were always chasing someone. She turned the corner and stopped. There he was. Liam stood by the tall windows, sunlight pouring over his shoulders like something cinematic. He was laughing with a boy holding up a lopsided self-portrait, offering praise that made the kid's chest puff with pride. He looked older, a little more tired, a little more grounded. But it was him. Unmistakably him. Elizabeth froze. As if sensing her, Liam turned. Their eyes met. The world quieted. No gasp, no dramatic music, just that look. Long, steady, full of everything left unsaid. He didn't smile. Not at first. Neither did she. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted, and something in her, some tight, quiet place, let go. He walked toward her. She met him halfway. They stood in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by fingerprints and dried paint, and laughter echoing from nearby rooms. The space between them was full, but not heavy. "Hi," she said, voice soft but sure. "Hey," he replied, equally quiet. A beat passed. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," she added. "Me neither," he said. "But I've been following your project, watching from a distance." Her brows lifted. "Why didn't you reach out?" "I wanted to see if it was real, if you were real." She nodded. "And?" His eyes searched hers. "You are." Another silence, comfortable this time. He motioned to the room behind him. "I volunteer here sometimes. Figured I'd give back to the places that gave me something when I had nothing." "You belong here," she said. "So do you." She smiled then. Really smiled. No pretense. No armor. Liam stepped closer. Not invading, just arriving. "You still, Ellie?" he asked, a teasing glint in his voice. She laughed quietly. "I think I'm finally just me." He reached out gently, fingers brushing hers. "Good. I like her." And that was it. No grand declarations, no apologies or demands. Just two people who had been broken and rebuilt, finding each other again, not as who they were, but as who they had become. Together, they turned back toward the classroom. The next chapter of their story would be written in crayon and watercolor, pencil and music, laughter and silence. They walked side by side, and this time, neither of them let go. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives like this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what part of the story touched you the most, or what you think happens next for Ellie and Liam. Your voice matters here.